y'all, we are here at Kolomoki Mounds State Park to do some exploring of the landscape that the Flint RiverQuarium was modeled after. It was pretty inspirational to the architect who was hired to design the building.
Yep, and so Kolomoki is a Muskogee Creek word, and it means place of the white oaks. So there's quite a few white oaks here, which we happen to find some and learn a little bit more about. But let's get started. We're gonna hike up this mound right here and learn a little bit more about this place. Let's go. Let's go.
So where I'm standing now is on top of the Temple Mound. This mound is about 56 feet high. It's pretty large up here. One end is higher than the other, so the high priest would have been up here with a ceremonial fire that was always lit. This is where the priest would have lived. On top of the mound overlooking the plaza and the community behind us and the other mounds in the distance. They've carbon dated and dated this area with different archaeological digs over the years. And this mound has been here for at least 700 years, and it is estimated that over 2 million basketfuls of dirt were carried and used to make this mound. So these ancient peoples, they didn't have bulldozers and shovels and tractors, obviously. They just carried the dirt in baskets by hand and piled it up and made this mound, which is super cool to think about. It would have been kept pretty clean. It would have been walked over a lot, so there wouldn't really have been grass necessarily at the top. Potentially some on the sides because you can't really mow that, and you needed the roots to hold it together to prevent the erosion. But it's an interesting thing to be here on top of the mound and to look out and imagine what it would have looked like 700 or 1,000 years ago.
So the mound behind me is the second largest mound at the Kolomoki, and it is a burial mound. It has been dated back to about 300 AD, and it is believed that this burial mound was the place for one of the leaders of the Muskogee Creeks. And so in this mound there are estimated to be about 5 chambers that are lined with logs, and in there is the leader, his servants, his wives, his slaves, also trophy skulls and other trinkets or possessions that he might have treasured when he was alive.
So behind me here at the base of the Temple Mound is the plaza. So during the times when this was an active site, it would have been pretty bare because people walked over it fairly often. The people that lived here lived kind of on the edges and in the middle of the plaza, around and in between the different mounds. There's a mound B, behind me here to my right, which has been excavated and determined to be a place where games were played. Games similar to stickball or chunky, and these games were beneficial in the fact that not only they kind of kept the players in shape, but they also taught them the skills that they needed for warfare, as well as like games such as stickball were a means for settling disputes. So rather than go to war and fight, they would play a game, and the winner would win the fight, and that would settle the disagreement.
So this tree right here is a white oak tree, which is what Kolomoki is named after. And you can identify it. It kind of has this white shaggy bark, or it's kind of a gray in color. And then also you can identify the white oak by its leaf. So here's a leaf right here. And they've kind of got these rounded lobes going around. So I always kind of remember the white oak because it's wavy or wavy white. So that's its leaf. And then what the most significant part about the white oak, or the most important part for the native people, was that it produced acorns. Now lots and lots of oak trees produce acorns, but white oaks are considered to have the best tasting acorns, or the least amount of bitterness to them, because acorns can be very, very bitter. Even the white oak acorns still are a little bit bitter because they have a chemical in them called tannins. and that can actually be poisonous if you consume too much of it. So what the native people would do is they would have to remove the tannins from the acorns before they could be consumed. So that involved gathering up the acorns, shelling them, and then taking the nut and boiling it to remove the tannins. And then after that process was finished, they could ground these acorns up into a flour and use it in their cooking. It was a very laborious process that took a lot of time, but it was very, very important for their way of life since it provided nutrients and a substance of living. This acorn is probably not a viable acorn that I found. It is not currently acorn season right now. Most oak trees will produce their acorns in the fall time, and it's currently just around the beginning of summer. This is probably an acorn that the tree dropped because it knew it was not going to be a viable acorn. So what many trees do, especially nut-bearing trees, is that if they have nuts that are not viable, there's something wrong with it, they're not going to spend any extra energy on trying to make it continue to grow. They're just going to drop it and focus all their energy on other acorns that are going to be more viable and produce more.
So this area, there's a small mound that they found here with just bits of pottery shards and pieces in it. No one's really sure what purpose the mound served. But I do have some replicas of some of the ceremonial pottery pieces, or these effigies. So the people who lived here, they would use pottery to carry water or to store water for their black drink, which was a type of tea, storage of the grains or the meal or the acorn flour like Rachel talked about, or just cooking over open fires. But then they got a bit more extravagant and ceremonial when these types of pottery were designed. So this is a possum, and we have a duck and a fish. Whoops, there we go. And I really like this guy who's an owl. So these effigies, each different animal had a different ceremony or religious purpose. So they could be for certain ceremonies, or they embodied a person or embodied a spirit or the spirit of the animal, kind of an anthropomorphic take on the animals and the people being one and together, which is just really cool. And remnants of these, not these are replicas, but remnants of these pottery shards have been found in different areas around here at Kolomoki. And baskets, well, this isn't one, but baskets like these made of river cane or oak bark would have been what the people carried the dirt and made the mounds in as well.
So this is what one of the dwellings would look like for the native people back in the day. It is called a wattle and daub house, and how they constructed it is that they would have posts or logs set up, and then they would use vines and branches to weave in and out of those logs, and then they'd use mud to pack it in to make it solid. And then for the roof, they used bunch grass as a thatched roof like this. The native people also grew a variety of different foods. In the summer, they'd grow corn, squash, pumpkin, sunflower, and beans. The corn, the squash, and the beans were actually considered the three sisters, as they were all grown in the same hole. The squashes would grow low to the ground and shade out the weeds, while the beans would grow up the corn stalks, so they all worked together. In the fall, in addition to gathering acorns, they would also gather hickory nuts to grind into meal. They also hunted, and fished in the river. The main food that they would hunt would be deer, turkey, and bear, and they would use most parts of the animal afterwards. The skins were used for clothing and baggage. The tendons were used for sinew, which was stretched out to be used as cordage. And then the meat was smoked to preserve. The tools and weapons they would use were often made out of things like bone and stone, and then also river cane and flint. Hey y'all, I hope y'all enjoyed this little sneak peek in Kolomoki Mounds. I hope y'all enjoyed learning a little bit about Georgia history.
Yeah, and we strongly encourage you to come visit this state park. It's a great place for hiking trails. You get to see a lot of Georgia native flora and fauna and learn a bit more about Georgia's history. Thanks, guys. Bye.